Well guys, I am 8 days out before I head 7,600 miles to the Arctic Circle. And something that I need to do before I leave is do a good inspection on the Gladiator. Plus, there's some things that I need to keep my eye on along the way. And so I am here with Jerry at Shift Autowerx, and we are going to talk through a bunch of the things kind of for most people's vehicles, but specifically if you have a Wrangler or a Gladiator, some things to look for. Jerry's got his pointer and he's got a flashlight, and let me just say that having a second set of eyes in this situation, especially a certified mechanic or Jeep technician, is absolutely the most important thing you can do before you head off the grid for a long trip. Jerry, thank you, buddy, for taking the time today. I appreciate you. It's a lot of miles coming up.
A lot, yes.
And let's be honest, there are specific things on the Jeeps that can fail.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Thankfully, I only have about 10,000 miles.
Yeah, you still don't need any. Well, aside from an air filter,
right?
That's pretty much all that you need.
So we're going to do a bunch of general maintenance. But before we use your little red pointer and get into some of the really specific things that I need to pay attention to, and we'll inspect today, what are some general things that just everybody should think about before they head deep off the grid?
So basic things that you want to make sure that they are okay on your Jeep. You want to make sure your oil level is good. You want to make sure your coolant level is good. You want to make sure you don't have any oil or coolant leaks. It's crucial that you don't have any oil or coolant leaking from your vehicle, or you're not going to make it very far.
And we're going to talk about some specific things to look for on the Jeep. What else, as far as suspension and tires and things, should they be looking at before they leave?
So you're going to be checking at your tire wear pattern. If it's wearing unevenly, you might want to go check your suspension components. Your alignment might be off. Play on your bushings, stuff like that. You want to check it before you make these long trips, as they can be problematic down the road.
Okay, all things that we're going to take a look at today.
Absolutely.
What about electrical? What are some important things to look at for electrical?
You want to make sure that any power wires are not touching any ground points, any sharp objects that could potentially turn into shorts, and especially if you have like aftermarket equipment in there, like so, you want to make sure that they are routed properly so that they don't cause any issues.
Yeah, full disclosure, Jerry already found a couple things that we need to address when it comes to electrical. So we're going to take a look at my Jeep, and then what I want to do, Jerry, if you don't mind, is can we talk about some specific tools and maybe some specific parts, spare parts that we should take towards the end? Does that sound okay?
Absolutely, let's do it.
Okay, so let's take a closer look at some specific things for the Jeep. All right, Jerry, let's talk about some specific things on my Gladiator that I need to be looking at now and along this way.
All right, but before we get specific, you have to replace your air filter before the trip, and make sure you take a spare with you, because I could tell this one's dirty already.
Yeah, in all fairness, I was in Arizona following a bunch of guys for several days, so I'm definitely going to do that. Okay, what's like the number one thing that fails on these 3.6s?
Okay, so number one point of failure on these 3.6 Generation 3 Chrysler engines is going to be the oil cooler. The oil cooler, we see so many of these, and they leak all the time. So before any major trip, you have to make sure that this is not leaking. The way that this leaks, it leaks the oil down into the valley of the engine, and then slowly but surely the oil starts to make its way all the way back into the bell housing of the transmission, and it leaks down through the bell housing of the transmission. So it makes you think that you have a rear main seal leak or an oil pan leak, when in reality it's this baby right here. So you got to make sure that this is inspected and replaced before any major trip.
Okay, now I know it failed on my Jeep Wrangler JK, so I'm familiar with this, but let's say it does fail. What do I do?
If it does fail, you're going to have to, there is no other choice but to replace it. You have to remove the intake manifold, then you have to remove the lower intake plenum, and once you remove the lower intake plenum, you expose the oil cooler. You start removing the bolts. You got to disconnect some coolant lines that are attached to it, and then you can remove it entirely, put the new one in there, and then reinstall everything that you removed. Now, every time we get an oil cooler leak here at Shift, we install an aluminum oil filter housing. We believe that this is 100% better than the polyurethane component that they put on the factory. So when you come over here, this is what you get. We don't use a OEM replacement. And there is no point of failure in this. This doesn't crack. This doesn't fail like the OEM. So it is 100 times better.
Okay. At how many miles should I be thinking about this? Like, I mean, I'm only at 10,000. Should I be worried now?
I don't think you should be worried now, but I have seen them fail early. It just depends on how much stress you put on the engine. Like, especially if you rev it really hard, all that vibration and everything can crack the plastic on that cooler, and then it can cause it to leak. So if you put your engine through excessive periods of stress all the time, it is more prone to leak.
I mean, I think on the JK it failed at like 90,000 miles. Is that pretty common?
That sometimes you get the unicorns that last a long time.
Yeah. All right, let's take a look at something else.
So the next thing that I would recommend you guys check is this right here. It's a component called the fuse array. It's in the power distribution box. So in order to check it, you got to remove the cover, right? And the fuse array sits underneath these connections right here. So on Brad's vehicle, you have 6 actual terminals connected to the fuse array. In order to check it, you got to remove those. They're 10 millimeter, and then what happens is you expose the fuse array. There's 2 tabs in there. You got to remove the fuse array, and to test it, you put a lead on one, and you test each other one individually. It is common that these fail, and when they fail, you get all sorts of lights on your dash, and almost none of the components on your vehicle, alternator, power steering, will operate properly if one of those fuses is blown. So that is something that you definitely want to take a look at and make sure that it's operating properly. Obviously, if you're having no lights on the dash or anything like that, then it is working properly. But if you start seeing those codes on the dash, then that's a good point to start.
Okay, so this potentially could be a good spare part to carry?
Yes, absolutely.
What's one of those cost?
Like $100 or something like that.
So a good peace of mind to take it with me.
Yes.
Simple, easy to fix. Just don't short it out, right? Is that what you're
Yes,
saying?
do not short it out. Actually, when you remove this, even if you disconnect your negative battery terminal, you still have power on these terminals because the auxiliary battery, if you have a 3.6 or a 2.0, you have an aux battery. If you have a 392, you do not. So on this case, if you disconnect these terminals, they still have power on them. So you got to make sure that they don't touch any sort of ground, or you will short something out.
Yeah. Now, checking your electrical system is important. Obviously, Jerry, I've got a lot of wires running through this thing,
Yes.
and I've done my best to organize them. I still want to redo this eventually,
Yes.
but I'm seeing a wire disconnected back there. Oops.
Yeah, man. I don't know who did the electrical work on this, but this is not good.
Yeah.
At the slightest bit of movement, it just came apart.
Yeah.
So
I thought
definitely needs to be redone.
I had a good seal on that fuse tab.
If
but,
it would have been a good seal, Brad, it would have not come off.
but see, that's why we're doing this inspection. So, okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about something else.
Okay.
All right, Jerry, thanks for sorting out my fuse tap. Obviously, solder is always better than a butt connector, so I appreciate that.
No problem.
What else should we be looking at?
All right, so another thing that you want to check is going to be your serpentine belt. The way to see if your serpentine belt needs replacement is by looking at the texture of the belt. So usually a brand new belt is texturized, and you can just see that it's like even ashy. It's supposed to be a little bit ashy like that. And you're not supposed to be able to see the ridges in between on that serpentine belt. If your serpentine belt is shiny and you can see the ridges, like a slight ridge line dividing the serpentine belt, you got to replace it, because sooner rather than later, it's just going to unravel. And then you're going to have problems with your alternator, your water pump's not going to be driven, and it can cause all sorts of issues.
Okay, in general, how long should this serpentine belt last me?
Serpentine belts nowadays last a really long time, anywhere from 60, 70, sometimes 80,000 miles.
Okay.
So they last a really long time. So just do a visual inspection on it. It is really apparent when it's bad. If you see that it's shiny and you have those slight like ridge marks on it, replace it.
Okay, but I should be good to go, but not a bad idea to carry an extra one?
Absolutely, because you can run into a situation where something gets in there and it causes damage to the belt, and then it can snap. So it's always a good idea to have a replacement.
Okay, cool. Let's look at some more stuff.
Awesome. Okay, a few more things to check. Obviously, make sure your oil level is good. Make sure your power steering level is also good. On these electronic power steering systems, usually from the factory, they come filled to the max line, but over time, the system bleeds out. It bleeds itself out. So make sure that you're at a proper level. Check it like, I don't know, I want to say every 10, 20,000 miles, and put it at the proper level. Now, another thing that you want to check also is going to be your coolant. Now, on these Gen 3 3.6s, unfortunately, it's really, really common that the cylinder head gasket fails on either side of the engine. It could be the left side cylinder head or the right side cylinder head, or both even. We've seen it all. Now, what you got to do to see if you have that problem, you check the coolant reservoir and make sure that it's at the max line. If it's below the max line, you got to top it off, and then you got to drive it. You got to drive it for like 2 weeks. Then you got to check it again. If it's low again, you got to top it off again and drive it again for another week or 2. Check the level. If it's low a third time, then you more than likely have some sort of coolant consumption issue that needs to be addressed. Definitely something that you need to pay attention to, because it is one of the most common issues on these 3.6s. Okay, so now that we spoke about the coolant level, a place where common leaks happen is going to be the radiator and the water pump. So what you want to do is you want to check the radiator. The radiator has 2 plastic side caps. These caps are sealed by a rubber that goes all the way around it, and then it's crimped. It is very common that the radiator leaks from the bottom portion on the radiator. So what you want to do, you want to get underneath, and then you look at the bottom of the radiator, and that usually if it's leaking from there, if it's a slight leak, you'll see it crust and it'll turn into like dirt, dry mud. So if you see that, more than likely your radiator is leaking. Got to get replaced. And another place where coolant commonly leaks is the water pump. The water pump, underneath the bearing of the pulley, there is a weep hole. This weep hole is commonly known for leaking. So you want to do is, again, get underneath the vehicle, and you want to check for crusting of the coolant. If it's dry coolant, you got to get that pump replaced. You'll see the coolant just trying to make its way down all the way to the ground. If it's a bad leak, you'll see it on the floor. But if it's just starting, you won't see it. You will see it only on the pump.
Guys, Jerry is dropping some really good knowledge. Now we're gonna get the Gladiator up on the lift and talk about some things underneath, but really quick, I saw this 392 sitting up on the lift in his shop, and there's a transfer case on the ground, and I asked him, I'm like, did the 392's transfer case go bad? Because some of you may remember that my 392 transfer case went bad, and the answer was yes, and he installed, look, I got the red pointed finger. That's an Atlas transfer case going in a 392. I'm very interested in that. That is super cool. I'm excited to see how this turns out. All right, let's go continue to see what I need to pay attention to on my Gladiator.
All right, so now that we have the vehicle up in the air, obviously you want to do a full thorough suspension inspection. But a few items to consider is going to be your ball joints. You want to make sure that those ball joints are tight on the knuckle. When you have aluminum knuckles like this one, the nut becomes loose all the time. So you want to make sure that you remove that cotter pin and tighten the nut. Don't over tighten it, because if you over tighten it, the threads can be pulled off of the ball joint. So make sure that it's tight and then put a new cotter pin in there. Another thing to check is going to be play on your U-joints for your axle shafts. So a way to check it, you're going to grab a pry bar or some sort of prying tool that you have and just put it in there and just move it up and down and make sure that the axle shaft is not moving when you're pushing. If it's moving, it means your U-joints probably have play and they need to get replaced. You can rebuild axles or you can buy new ones. Either way, it works. Another thing to check is going to be your steering system. To check the steering system, you're going to need to be inside the vehicle, and with the vehicle running, rock the steering wheel back and forth. If you feel any sort of clicking or thumping on the steering wheel, more than likely you have play in one of your steering components, so you might want to get those checked as well. Now, moving a little bit further back into the Jeep, you want to make sure that your bushings don't have play. If you use a pry bar and you pry in between the control arm and where it mounts, If it moves back and forth, you have play and they need to be fixed. This play can lead to broken bolts and stuff like that that could potentially leave you stranded. Another thing to check on your front differential is going to be your axle seals. Axle seals on the front differential are not on the outside, they're on the inside, on the pumpkin, right here. So what you want to do is check if you have oil coming from the tube outside here. If you do, your axle seals are bad and they need to be replaced. So the next thing you want to look at is going to be your drive shaft. Jeep Wranglers and Gladiators come with a CV style joint where it meets the transfer case and a U-joint style where it meets the differential. Check for play on the side that meets the differential and make sure you don't have any. If you have any play, it needs to be replaced. In the back where it meets the transfer case, there is a boot. If that boot is torn, you lose all the grease and lubrication on it. So you want to make sure that that boot is not torn. If you have an aftermarket suspension and it's lifted, it is more common that these components fail and you need to get an aftermarket with a double cardan style. Moving towards the back of the vehicle, another thing that you want to check is your rear drive shaft. On the Gladiator, you have a two-piece drive shaft that also has a CV joint style on the transfer case. Make sure that boot is in good condition. And then if you move a little bit further back, you're going to see the bearing. This is the bearing and it's a bushing as well. If that bushing is torn, the drive shaft will vibrate and you will feel it inside the vehicle. Moving a little bit further back, you also have a CV joint style where it meets the differential. You want to make sure that boot is also in good shape or you're going to lose all lubrication in it and it will become a problem. As you move back into the sides of the differential, you want to make sure that there's no oil leaking from the axle shaft seals. The way to look at it is going to be right here. You're going to be oil dripping down and that means your seal is probably in bad shape. Same thing for the right side. You want to make sure that your bushings are in good shape, pry on them, make sure that they don't have any play, make sure your bolts are tight on the control arms, and don't forget about your brake pads. Make sure you check front and rear brake pads. Good thickness on the brake pads, depending on what year you're on. On a Gladiator and Wrangler, usually 8 millimeters is a good brake pad. 7 is still good. If you get into the 3s and 4s, then you need to replace them.
Jerry, I appreciate you dropping all that knowledge on us, man. That's some good information and some things that I kind of didn't know about that I will be looking for on the trip, so I really appreciate that. Now I want to talk about tools and spare parts, and I think it's important that everybody carries just some general tools. This is the tool bag that I carry. It's just got all the basics in there, and plus you've got some trail stuff fixed. You got some baling wire, some duct tape, zip ties, but all the good things. But there's some specific tools, Jerry, that you said that I should carry, and I actually don't have a couple of these. Can you go through and talk about these real quick?
Yes, absolutely. So Jeep Wranglers and Gladiators, especially the newer models, they come with Allen and Torx and also E-Torx style bolts. So you definitely want to have these handy.
E-Torx socket.
Yes.
I don't have these. Why do I need these?
Because some of the bolts in there do require that. And don't get me wrong, you can use sometimes, you can use a hex style socket, but it is more likely to strip. So you want to make sure you have the right tools when you need to do a repair.
Okay, got that. This is the Big Daddy.
Yes.
Do I really need this thing? This is massive.
If you have an aftermarket suspension with adjustable control arms, this is what you want to use to tighten the jam nuts.
Okay.
You want to make sure that those are tight, so that's why I always carry one of these.
Got it. I have some big wrenches in there, but I don't think I have a 24 to 25. Why do I need some of these big ones?
Most of the suspension components, most of the suspension bolts on the Gladiator and the Wrangler come with 24, 22, and 21 size bolts. So you want to make sure you have these to make sure that they are tight. These components are tight. Okay, well good. You like the longer one because it gives you a little more leverage, plus
exactly.
This will help you get into some of those tight spots if you need it?
Exactly. So depending if how high you are off the ground, you can put it at an angle and then you have all the leverage that you need to get them tight. That's a good idea. I probably need to get some of these. And then this is one that I think folks forget a lot. What do we got here?
This is a 36 millimeter socket. We use this to remove the nuts of the axle shafts.
Yeah, very specific. That's the only thing you're going to use this for.
Yes, you don't really have any other 36 millimeters nuts in the vehicle, so this you would take it to replace an axle shaft.
Yeah, but you need to have this.
Absolutely, and make sure you take a 1/2 inch ratchet to be able to drive that.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I have tire repair kit. I have a couple ratchet straps. I carry a bottle jack versus the scissor jack.
Yeah.
I've also got a jump starter here, and I have. This is my programmer, but it's also a code reader that allows me to clear my codes. Do you have a specific code reader that you like?
No, this one works pretty good. If you end up with a check engine light, if it's a sporadic issue and you're able to clear it, you might be able to drive and continue your trip.
Not be in limp mode.
No, it is very good that you carry a scanner with you.
Okay, let's talk about spare parts, and specifically something you mentioned that I don't need to carry that I always carry. I have a 1310 U-joint that I take with me everywhere, but you're just telling me it's not going to do me any good in my Gladiator. Why?
Because the 1310 U-joint for a drive shaft on the Gladiator, you're not going to be able to remove it. It is riveted in, so even if you bang it, you will not be able to get it out.
So it's not held in with like a normal snap ring.
You got to remove the drive shaft and send it out to get rebuilt.
Wow.
If you want that drive shaft rebuilt.
So that's a pretty good argument to get aftermarket drive shafts, so then I can replace U-joints if I need to.
Not only are they stronger, like let's say you get a 1350, you get the double cardan style drive shaft, and it's just a way better component.
Yeah. In my tool bag, I've got a Ziploc bag of just bolts and nuts and screws, because you just never know what you're going to need. But specifically, what would you recommend you carry?
Take 18mm bolts like this one.
Okay.
This is for like a shock, so make sure you carry some of these with the nuts. And then this is for like a control arm also. So this is a 21. Some aftermarket companies, when you install a lift, they send you their hardware. So make sure if you have any original hardware, make sure you take it with you in case you have a failed component. So it is very important that you carry some bolts, because they tend to break.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm about covered, Jerry. I really appreciate it, man. I know I'm going to be keeping an eye on the Gladiator on this trip, and when I get back, I'm bringing it back, and I'm just going to give it to you and be like, give it a once over, man.
Absolutely.
I think that's super important. If folks want to bring their vehicle by, how do they get a hold of you?
Call us. Make an appointment. 442-257-2420. Or online. You can go online, shiftautowerx.com. All our information is there. We would be more than happy to help you guys with any issues that you have with your Jeeps, whether it's engine repair, modifications, tires, wheels, alignments, you name it, we do it all.
Or even just bring it by for an inspection.
Absolutely.
Like just sometimes a second set of eyes will find things that you're not seeing. Right?
Yes, if you're going to go on a trip, I do always recommend have it inspected by a certified technician that knows exactly what to look for to prevent any issues down the road.
Well, guys, I hope you've found this video informative. I got a lot to do before I hit the road, but Jerry, thank you, buddy.
Very welcome.
Talk soon. Thanks, guys. We'll see you in the next video.